You're tuned in to the Zealous Podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder, your host. This week, I've got Chris Bailey, PhD. He's a clinical associate professor at the University of Texas, also a presenter at this year's NSCA National Conference, July 12th to the 15th in Las Vegas, Nevada. Tune in, make sure that you subscribe, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and enjoy the show. Chris, thanks for coming on to Zealous with me. I'm excited to chat with you because, one, we'll be meeting in person, hopefully face-to-face this summer, July 12th to the 15th at the NSCA National Conference in Vegas. But before that, just reaching out to you to get a little insight as to not only what you're going to be presenting on, but just your background and experience, because most of the guests that I have on the show are people that have gone through formal institutes and universities and colleges and whatnot and have made their way into the world of professional sports. You yourself, you're in North Texas and you are a professor there at the university. How did you get to, what's your path, I guess? Let's give a little background to the listening audience.
Yeah, definitely. First off, thanks for having me on. So I started probably similar to a lot of other people in strength and conditioning, where I, played sports, but for me, it was mostly baseball. And there's a certain point where my work ethic definitely exceeded my talent level. And I definitely want to stay in sports though. So when I was an undergrad, actually this was before I was an undergrad, when I was enrolling in classes, fortunately I got to meet who would eventually become my advisor and my mentor, Mike Martino at Georgia College of State University. And I was kind of telling him what I wanted to do. And he said, sounds like you want to do strength and conditioning. And at the time, this is 2002, I was, just finished high school, didn't really know what that was. Didn't know that was a field, but that's definitely what I wanted to get into. So did my undergrad there, and then was able to intern at a sport performance facility under Gary Schofield. And then worked part-time in sport performance training for about a year, went back and got my master's. After that, worked as a minor league strength coach for the Padres for 2 seasons. And then had the opportunity to go do my PhD at East Tennessee State University, which is the program that Mike Stone created. But my dissertation was supervised by Kimi Sato, which was on looking at asymmetry, strength asymmetry specifically. And after finishing that up, I got a job at LaGrange College, which is a small private school in Georgia. When I say small, it's 1,000 students total. It's not very big, but it was great because we could really integrate the academic side of things to the athletic side of things. So we could set up situations where students are immediately getting hands-on experience with a lot of the stuff we're talking about. We developed a graduate program in strength and conditioning there as well. And then I think it's after the 4th year there, my wife was finishing up her veterinary residency, and we needed to move somewhere where both of our careers can be supported. So I ended up at the University of North Texas, where I'm still teaching a lot of the same things within strength and conditioning. And specifically what I teach now is mostly quantitative analysis and biomechanics at the undergrad level. But then at the grad level, another quantitative analysis course, as well as a athlete monitoring course that I teach every other year, basically. But previously I've taught strength and conditioning, different levels of strength and conditioning courses as well.
So the student body difference between LaGrange and North Texas is what?
So that's a good question. And it's very easy to do the math, I think, because it's like 44,000 students at North Texas. So it's like 44 times as big. And it's a very different scenario, obviously, just because besides that, but my department, my program has more students than LaGrange College did total. So it's drastically different as far as that goes.
I'm just remembering the Bugs Bunny cartoon. He's in a baseball scenario, now pitching Bugs Bunny. First base, Bugs Bunny. Catching, Bugs Bunny. That's LaGrange as far as I'm seeing right now. You had students that could wear so many different hats and get so much experience in the trenches with the sports programs that were there. And half the time they were probably the athletes themselves. But North Texas, how do you try and replicate that in such a huge university? Or do you?
Yes and no. So I absolutely try to, but you can't always do it perfectly the same way. And it's not necessarily that saying that the smaller schools are perfect, but they're set up differently, and it allows us to do certain things. But we definitely we try to do things with labs whenever we can. So we might have one lecture with many labs, and in the lab space, the problem is you're limited by the space. So you might only be able to have 20 people in a lab at a time, but your lecture may have 160, which that's an extreme case. That's not the way it normally goes. Our classes aren't that big. We usually have multiple sections in the same class, but we want to set up labs, but we don't always have a lab experience or lab space to do those things. Like for our undergraduate, like fundamentals of strength and conditioning class, we do have lab space, which is awesome. But for something like biomechanics and exercise physiology, we don't already have labs set up. We're working on getting those things set up. So I end up within biomechanics actually taking time to have the students do things in the classroom that they would be normally doing in a lab. Which
such as, like, can you give an example?
Yeah, definitely. So like there's several different examples, and this is kind of what I'll talk about in the when I'm speaking on this summer at NSCA. But I'll set up group work where they can step aside and either work through a scenario that they're given, where they can literally just talk through it. But sometimes we might do something like we talk about squat mechanics and how our mechanics impact our center of gravity. And then usually what I ask is I'll set up a scenario where I just open up for the entire classroom and ask them, what is good squat technique? And you'll start to hear a lot of different cues and things people give. And inevitably, somebody will eventually say, you can't let your knees pass your toes. And then I'll say, okay, well, what does that actually look like? So we draw a free body diagram of what, or actually I do one in PowerPoint first, which allows your knees to go past your toes. And then I have them do it again where they limit how far the knees can translate forward. And then I say, well, what happens biomechanically because of this? And they're all standing up, and if I can, I'll bring like PVC pipes or something like that for them to actually do squats with. It just depends on where the classroom is and how the classroom size, but and then they have to draw the free body diagram and see like how do the mechanics change when they limit how far the knees can go in front of their toes. So then they start to notice that when their knees don't go in front of their toes, they end up having a lot more trunk flexion, which isn't good. So it's one of those, like we start to see that, or actually I make them quantify as well, only considering the external load, and I always give them something that's easy. I'll tell them it's 100 kilos because I have 9.81 for gravity. It's 981 newtons, easy math. And then I give them a way to measure the different moments and things like that. So you can see like how does the hip moment change, the knee moment change, all of that in relation to where does the center of gravity change when we alter our squat mechanics. And eventually I usually bring up, I think it was Andy Fry's study from 2003. It was in JSCR where they literally made people do this, where they put a piece of plywood at their toes and wouldn't let their knees go beyond their toes, and saw how that altered, squat mechanics. So like something like that was very applied, where they have to work through it, and I make them use biomechanical terms. But it's a strength conditioning scenario that all of them can relate to, because most often they've heard that cue at some point, and then they realize that yes, that could be, we can say that, but does it really work in the real world if we're not using a Smith machine? Like if you're actually doing a regular barbell squat.
Sure. Now, do you have the ability to use like 3D capturing? Are you using force plate technology? Is that how you're determining all this?
No. So for this is purely a scenario, like a hypothetical scenario for them, but they're doing the math on paper.
I see.
But it is, they can do it in their head. Again, it's simple because I try to keep the number simple. But we definitely have we have two force plates that we use. They're portable force plates, very large AMTI force plates. They're great, but we don't always teach classes in our building. And even though we say they're portable force plates, they're not force plates that I want to drag from one building to another, even though they're on wheels. So I will usually show like something with screen capture, like how those things work, but we can have them done in the lab later on if they want to see that. And that's kind of getting at what I was saying, like where we want to build in more lab experiences, because we would like to have that part built into the class as well, where they could actually get on the force plate, squat the different ways. And we wouldn't, with a force plate, we'd look at center pressure, not at an actual center of gravity, but we could see how their center pressure changes when they alter their mechanics. Because obviously, if their knees don't go in front of their toes, their center pressure has to shift back unless they make some other change to accommodate that by leaning forward.
Well, this kind of takes me back to what you were mentioning about your PhD and asymmetries. I'm curious, I don't want to give away everything that you're going to be presenting on this summer, so we'll just give them a taste of that. But looking back to when you were in Tennessee, can you expand upon what you found with your research in regards to asymmetries?
Yeah, definitely. And this is actually, so the asymmetries I spoke on last summer in SEA, and just got back from speaking on that on that in Japan. So I can definitely talk quite a bit on that, and I won't be giving anything away really. Yeah, so the way we set that up is we have two force plates, and we do whatever task you want to, if it's bilateral, off two force plates, and we look for a difference there. So my first study I published was in 2013, and I just looked at peak force asymmetry in the isometric mid dipole. So that's basically like the second pole position of a clean, but it's isometric, so they're not going to go anywhere. And looked at jump height and peak power, just correlated with that, and we saw that the more asymmetrical somebody was, it was a decrement to jump height and peak power, which was good, I guess, but it's one of those that it's like, it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, and the more you look into it, I started to realize that peak force is not the best measure, because when we're looking at it from an asymmetry standpoint, we can have perfectly symmetrical peak force, but that doesn't necessarily mean they occur at the same time. So we can achieve the same force in each, but it doesn't, and the only reason I really notice this is because with the analysis program that we're running, we can see the force time curves at this, like as I'm doing the analysis, and it's like, oh, it's the same value, but one happens 50 milliseconds before the other one does. So it's symmetrical by the way we quantify it, but in real life, that's not symmetrical. So we have to start looking at other variables like force at specific time periods, impulse, rate of force development. And through those, we can get a better picture of what's actually happening. So then the other studies from my dissertation looked at males compared to females, and then strong and weak, stronger and weaker individuals. And initially I noticed there was a difference. Females were more asymmetrical than males, but later on you start to figure out that that's actually not a function of being male or female. It was just a function of strength level within my sample. So if we actually separated it because just stronger and weaker, we would see that there might be some females that are stronger than some males and so on, but it was actually more of a function of strength. The people that are stronger have less asymmetry than people that are weaker. And we've done several other studies, we've seen it from other studies since then, that as you get stronger, most often asymmetries seem to go away. And there's a recent, I don't know how recent it was, it's past 4 or 5 years, meta-analysis looking at different types of training in asymmetry. And it seems that it really doesn't even matter what type of training you do, that asymmetry dissipates. I mean, it does matter, but to the extent, like pretty much every type of training they did, asymmetry started to go away. So it seems like basically, as long as you're getting stronger, more than likely your asymmetry is probably going to go away. And if that's something you are concerned about for your sport, that might be the easiest cue to give, or the easiest thing to tell somebody is like, just get everyone stronger, because most likely the asymmetry is going to dissipate.
That's interesting, and that includes the timing of peak power or strength.
So yeah, so it's as you're getting, it's a much more complicated question, because we're looking at a lot of different variables. But for most of the ones they quantified in that meta-analysis, yes. I guess complicate even more. What I really talked about at the last summer, as well as in Japan, and actually this was an article published in JSCR in 2021. Most of the studies that are presented, the reliability of asymmetry is very poor. So we're talking about a lot of this stuff with asymmetry about, how do we get rid of it? Does it impact jumping performance or other sporting tasks? We might be jumping the gun a little bit, because if the reliability isn't there, and since we know that reliability is a part of validity, we don't necessarily even know that we're working with valid data. This could be noise. A lot of what we're looking at, it seems like it might actually be there's some noise in there. I'm not saying that all the studies that are done are not good. It's just we don't really, by the way the reliability is published, if it's published, it doesn't necessarily tell us if it's actually reliable. A lot of times the way that it's quantified is that we'll quantify, instead of quantifying the actual asymmetry value, So let's say rate of force development asymmetry. Let's say that 0% is perfectly symmetrical, and then the larger the value is, the more asymmetrical it is. Often people will do the reliability or evaluate reliability on the variable rate of force development, not on the rate of force development asymmetry. So they're actually evaluating it before they quantify the asymmetry. If that makes sense.
So yeah. I'm curious though, because how I can produce force on one side of my body can be crazily different than how I do it on the opposite side. I can be driving through explosive hip extension on one side, but shoulder levation on the opposite. So it could look like I'm being symmetrical because of the force being produced, but how I actually create that force may be quite unique from one side to the next. So my question here, Chris, is this, is that are all of the tests bilateral movements, or are you also looking at unilateral movements to determine asymmetries?
So I only looked at bilateral, and that's what I've done during my PhD, and then afterwards, I feel like most of them looked at bilateral. And even within that, I also looked at, like, once we produce force asymmetrically, kinematically, what happens to our body. So actually using 3D motion capture, after we jumped asymmetrically, do we go off in a different direction? And the short answer is yes, but it's not as direct as we think, because we might manipulate our body in some other ways, or we might change some other things. But there have been other people that have looked at it from a unilateral standpoint as well. So they might have somebody, jump off one leg and then jump off the other leg and then do that comparison. I've read, and that's a lot of that research was in my lit review, and there's been research that's come out since then that's looked at the same thing. So that's definitely another way to quantify it. Which that's also, like, it's sometimes when you read that, it doesn't make sense, because you might have jump height from the right leg and a jump height from the left leg, it does make sense if you know you're jumping off one leg, right? But certainly, you can also quantify it. Yeah. But if you're doing it bilaterally at the same time, it's like, wait, how do you have two different jump heights when it's the same person at the same time? That's where it gets a little bit fuzzy. But the way they're doing that is because they're estimating the jump height from each force plate individually, not looking at the actual center of mass or the center of gravity.
So ultimately, the conclusion is the more trained athlete, the greater the reduction of asymmetries.
It seems that way. So the study that I was involved with, that we actually evaluated that on, was in some ROTC cadets. And I was not the one training them, but they pretty much did bilateral training. And even those, because you would think that if we have one weak side, we should train the weak side more than the other side if we want to get it back to where it was. This study looked at it they just did the normal training, and as they got stronger, their asymmetries dissipated. But there definitely has been research that have shown that if you do it the other way, if we have left side asymmetry, weakness on the left side, do 3 sets on the left side to 2 sets on the right side, that definitely will dissipate, or asymmetry will dissipate that way as well. But it seemed like most of the studies that have looked at trying to get asymmetry to go away, no matter what they do, it seems to go away. So there could be reasons for that. It could be, what was their actual sample to start with? Because if you're starting with people that aren't trained, no matter what you do, it's going to work. But if you're working with elite athletes, that might be a different thing. So if we're working with a baseball player, they're going to be asymmetrical, because especially if they're at a higher level, they've been doing asymmetrical activities for their entire life. And I don't really necessarily know that we need to make those asymmetries go away, because that might hinder their performance. That might be a byproduct of being a good baseball player. But that's some of the things you have to think about with those studies is, where do they start with? Is that why everybody got better? The other thing was, I think there was one study that looked at the exercise or the order, and they indicated that if you started training the weaker side first, so like set 1 is on the weaker side, they saw better improvement than if you started on the strong side. But when you sum it all together,
no, go ahead, please.
I'd say when you add it all together, it seems like just get stronger, and it works, and it kind of goes away. So if you're worried about asymmetry, just get stronger.
Got it. Okay, what got you intrigued by this? I mean, because as a student, you've got to come up with a question, you got to come up with some type of topic and then narrow it down. What inspired you to do it in this direction?
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good question. When I started, or sometime during my master's, Greg Cook reached out to my supervisor, which was Mike Martino, and he was doing a FMS conference in Atlanta, and so he invited both of us to come up, and went through the conference, and I ended up getting the FMS certification. This would have been, I guess, 2007, 2006, 2007, sometime around then. I didn't really know much about it, but that's when I started looking at asymmetries. Was going through that training at that conference, and after that, I think it may have been 2008 or 2009 for the baseball winter meetings. Joe Torring, who was the strength coach for the Indianapolis Colts, gave a presentation on the FMS to the Major League Baseball strength coaches at the PBS CCS conference they had. I didn't know any of this was happening, but after my master's, I'm applying for jobs. And just because that happened, a lot of the baseball strength conditioning population, like they were looking for more people that looked at FMS. And so it just so happened that I had that certification right after I came out of the master's. And that's pretty much what helped me get my job in baseball, was that I had that. But anyway, so then throughout baseball, working with people that are going to be asymmetrical. So then I came to do my PhD. I kind of still wanted to look at asymmetry. And we weren't really well set up to do like an FMS type of study. We definitely could have done it. But just looking at the setup we had at East Tennessee State, most of our force plates was actually 2 force plates. So all we had to really do was just look at a signal individually and then, do some types of comparisons. So then, if we think about it, like from a biomechanical standpoint, kinetics and kinematics, the kinetics are what's going to cause the changes in the kinematics. So it makes sense to start the force asymmetry first and then see what happens from there.
But you would also look at the kinematic sequencing on left side versus right side?
I did. For my final study on my dissertation, so what I had them do is I think I did squat jump and counter movement jump off the 2 force plates, and we used Vicon 3D motion capture, but I only looked at the lower body, and had them jump and saw like if they produce force asymmetrically, what changes we saw happen. And I think it was rate of force development, and a couple of those. But I looked at from the anterior posterior center mass displacement, as well as medial lateral. And of course, we'd expect medial lateral displacement to be off. If I jump stronger with my right side, you'd expect to propel this way, or towards the opposite side. And we do see a little bit of that. But it was interesting because it wasn't a perfect correlation, which is what I expected. Not a perfect correlation, but I expected it to be much more clear. I think that's probably a limitation of when you insert humans, you're going to insert some amount of variability. There have been, before I even started my PhD, I think it was 2011, I guess it was the year I started my PhD. There was a study that did a computer simulation study from a biomechanical model looking at asymmetries, which is the way that we like to think, because it's we change something and we should see another change down the road exactly in this direction. But once we started evaluating humans, it wasn't that direct.
Yeah. No, I mean, just from the hips down, 36 joints. That's quite a lot of variability from one side to the other. So and I go back to that scene or that line from Jurassic Park with Jeff Goldblum. He says, "Life finds a way." I just think movement finds a way, and it can be so seemingly chaotic, but and so different from one side to the other. But in terms of force production, we find a way to get it done. That's really curious. Now, with your time with the San Diego Padres and the minors, were you in Southern California, Arizona? Where are you headquartered out of?
Arizona. So
Arizona.
I would go to my first year. I got there in spring training in Peoria, Arizona. Stayed there through extended, and then they sent me to their short season team. It was before they shrunk the minor leagues down. So we had a team in Eugene, Oregon. So finished the season there. Next year I came back, came back to Arizona, but then went to their team in San Antonio, which is their AA team. So for my second season for that one. And then after that was when I went to ETSU.
And there was no pink clouds, no honeymoon. You said that was a nice experience. I'm going to go back into the college university setting. Or
no,
what,
I think it was
kind of.
Well, I think a lot of times when you look at graduate education, most often you do something when you have funding to do it. So I wasn't going to have to get as much like student loans or any of that type of thing. So once I had some funding to do my PhD, which I had what they called it, tuition scholarship. It wasn't a full-on fellowship or graduate assistantship to start with, but since it was going to be mostly paid for, I was like, I want to jump on this now because I won't be the one paying for it. So that was the main reason. I even into my final year of my PhD, I wasn't really sure that I wanted to go into academia. And literally now, if you ask me, like when a student asked me, when did I know what I wanted to do when I grew up? I usually say, I'll let you know, because it's one of those things that I think keeps evolving. But I kind of wanted to go back into baseball after the PhD, but it just wasn't, the job opportunities weren't really there at the time, and ended up going into academia and, really enjoying it as well.
And what is it that you enjoy about it? I mean, can you pick it apart? And for those that are kind of on the fence of what direction to go in, how would you, I won't say advertise it, but what are the pitfalls and the summits? What gets you going?
Yeah, because there's definitely both pitfalls and summits on those. I really enjoy especially where I first started, was I could stay working with athletics at the same time as working in academics. So, and you can kind of see that when the light bulb goes off for some of these students, like we're explaining something, once they really get it, once they're able to apply it, actually see them put it into practice. And it's not necessarily like we're holding their hand, walking them through some scenario, when we see them solve some problem because of the content from some subject. That's really great to see. Obviously, it's also great to see like when they get jobs, when they pass a CSCS, something like that. But I think that whole integration between academics and whatever they're going to get into. For most often, what I talk about is going to be with athletics, because my PhD is in sport physiology and performance. That's what I like. But if they want to be a PT student, like just seeing that light bulb go off when they learn how to manipulate like the external moment arm of like whatever it is to make it easier for their client. That's another scenario I usually give them, like something like that. Like it's great to see them learn that and how to apply it. But then there's other times where it's definitely there's struggles, because they don't care about the subject you're teaching all the time. Not every student has the same focus that I do. One of the main courses I teach here is quantitative analysis, which is statistics. So I generally try to give them data sets to work through, so their hands-on in that class is literally working with data and doing different types of analysis. I try to give them data sets that are pretty broad, but also usually things that they might be interested in. But they're not always going to be interested in it. Like, so if I give them NBA data or NFL data to work with, some of them like that, but some of them don't. Some of them aren't going to know what any of the abbreviations mean. And also students sometimes just don't come prepared for class, which when I say sometimes, anytime we give a lecture, there's going to be at least one student that's not prepared for it. So it's going to be something that it's tough to work through that, because you have to teach every student, right? You want to get to the ones that are very well prepared, but also you want to get that other student up to that level as well. So it's kind of hard to sometimes hit every single, do something that's valuable to all of them at the same time.
And how much creative license do you have when it comes to developing courses and curriculum?
So a lot. I mean, there's definitely certain things that, and also in certain states, there's some things that can be prevented, but not really in the area that we would teach. For pretty much like anything I've wanted to do, I've been allowed to do. At UNT, I actually, for that quantitative analysis class, I developed a textbook for that. It's an open educational resource that students can access for free. So it's an online textbook. So they go in and I go through, talk about all the different theory behind the different statistical procedures we're going to run, but I also give them a data set that I've either created or I found publicly available. And then there's a tutorial that they work through. So they will do that in person in class. I teach it as a hybrid course. So they have an online lecture first. So it's hybrid, but it's also flipped. So depending on your who's listening, they may or may not know what that actually means. But a flipped model in a classroom basically means they're going to go through the content, like the lecture-based content that the traditional stand in front of somebody and just lecture, that type of stuff happens online. And when they come to class, we do all hands-on stuff, whatever that is. So if you're talking about a strength conditioning class, what that hands-on action would be different than what it's going to be in that quantitative analysis class. So in quantitative analysis, they come in and they're going to be working with, Major League Baseball StatCast data or whatever it is in person. But they're literally typing on a laptop. That's how they get that hands-on experience. So looking at that type of performance data, but if we did a flipped model for something else, it would look different. But that's one of the things I'm also going to kind of talk about at NSCA is why I really like that model, because it gives us more time in class to do the lab applied based activity.
Yeah, and just more ways to learn too. More ways for everyone learns in a fairly different fashion. Okay, how about this, Chris? I'm not going to say the most ridiculous, but the most kind of outlier research that you've ever been a part of. Has there been anything that's kind of on the fringe or like, all right, well, okay, let's do it just for the heck of it?
I don't think it's really on the fringe. I think it was actually kind of a cool study. We didn't publish it, and I think it was because we didn't really standardize it super well. It was an undergrad research project. So what this started was when I first started at LaGrange College, softball was the first team I worked with. At the time, I had a greyhound dog that I think my apartment, they were like doing something in it, and then the dog couldn't be there. So I had to bring him in, and the softball team is coming in to work out. So my dog's just there. And everybody was like, can you please bring in, his name was Jimmy, which most greyhounds, if they're former race dogs, have funny names. But like, can you bring him next time? I'm like, sure. But then it's one of those, their attitude was so much better if there was a dog there. So somebody that was a freshman on that team, when they were a senior doing they had a capstone research project for that program, they wanted to evaluate what is the actual impact of having a dog in the weight room. So this was an interesting one to get by the IRB. So if you're, the IRB is like, anytime we do human subjects research, we have to get approval to do it. It's an institutional review board. The reason it's tricky is because we have to do something called coercion, where we're going to purposely mislead people in a study. And by misleading is I just tell them we're going to evaluate, I think it was the jump performance, and we looked at RPE, like how difficult they thought the session was. And the way we misled them was I didn't tell them anything about the dogs being there. It was just one day the dogs were there, one day they weren't. And then we did randomize it. So we had 2 different groups coming in. So one group had the dogs there the first time, and the next group had them the next time. And they all said they felt better when the dogs were there. But as far as like an actual impact, there was no difference. Like because we do monitor jumps every once a week. There's no difference in jump performance. They all specifically said they enjoyed it, but their RPE, like how they perceive the difficulty of the session, which was the same for both, from a volume load standpoint, there was no difference. It's interesting, but it was just one of those where it's like not something I ever thought I would really be doing. But
very cool. So emotional changes, maybe not force production, but at least mindset was pretty cool. All right. Yeah. And how has your veterinarian wife run with that study?
She hasn't. She's done some research on her own, but not there. We actually do have some conversations quite often about physical therapy in animals, small animals. So she must work with dogs and cats. So there are, and like this is one of those things we never, unless you are involved with it, you may never think about it, but there's physical therapy that happens in animals as well. So you could be a physical therapist for a chihuahua if you wanted to be.
Oh yes, no. Yeah. I've got friends that, believe it or not, are actually dog massage therapists. But then again, I live in Santa Cruz, California, so you never know. Maybe there's more outside of my confines. So then, Chris, when it comes to working with such a large student body, comparing it to the much smaller one in LaGrange, what are the biggest challenges for you? From a teaching standpoint, obviously grading, so we can check that off the list. But what are the other things that come up for you that make you have to do some troubleshooting?
Yeah. So, one thing I do with every assignment or anything I do, just the same way we do with athlete testing, or anything monitoring, we have to have a reason why we're testing something, but also we have to have a way in mind of like how we are going to analyze this to end up anyway. We're not going to just collect data and then just have it sit there, which actually, I guess that does happen, but that's not what we want to happen. So the same thing with when I create an assignment for a student, I already know there's gonna be a way I'm gonna test that or analyze it. So whenever I can put in automation as far as grading, I do it. So I do a lot of things where like I set up assignments as quizzes where they do something like that, like whether they be the quantitative analysis course or something in biomechanics, where they have to solve for something. I know they were able to, do it correctly if they're able to answer the quiz question correctly. So they actually have to, I might ask them like, what was the R value, the correlation value when you ran this correlation? And they have to go to their correlation matrix or whatever they made and answer that. So I know if they got the right answer, they got there. But I also know it because I'm walking around while they're doing it and checking in with all the students. So for the different classes, what I will do is have them separate into groups. And then I kind of float between groups and just with their scenario, whatever problem they're working on that I gave them, kind of see how well they're grasping it. But there's also other ways that you can do this with large traditional lectures, which I don't do much of, but you can use something called Clicker or iClicker, which is an app that integrates with within PowerPoint. So you can have a question pop up on the PowerPoint or whatever lecture software you're using, and they respond on their phone, and then it populates so we can kind of see like how well is the class as a whole grasping the material. Because are they all getting it correct? Are they all getting it incorrect? Because both of those answers, I mean, if they're all getting it correct, we can move on. If they're all getting incorrect or there's a lot of them getting correct, we need to cover more. But one other thing I do with that is often, if I do that, is I put an I don't know response. And I ask them truly, if you don't know, put I don't know, because I don't want you guessing and potentially guessing the correct answer and then me misunderstanding that, more people got it right than did.
That's a great learning tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, it definitely helps.
You've been using that for a while?
Yeah, so that's been around for a long. There's another one, Poll Everywhere, that a lot of people use. It's free. A lot of them they're free, but then how much you use it, there's going to be paid versions. But most universities and places like that will pay for the license of those things for their entire school. I think we have both at UNC. iClicker is the one I use. Another thing that it does, because it's the problem that most people, the kickback to this is, as soon as you have them with their phones out to where they're going to respond to a question via text, the problem is their phone's out. Now they're on, whatever app, social media thing they want to be on when they're supposed to be paying attention. iClicker actually tracks, I think they call it alertness or awareness, where basically anytime they navigate away from the app, it collects a timestamp. And then when they come back, it gets the timestamp again. So it basically tells you or tells the professor if they want to look at it, were they truly engaged in class? Were they constantly, or were they looking at something else on their phone? Which for my students, I normally don't, that's not something I look at unless there's an issue. Like if a student's not doing well or like talking through, like what can we do to make things better? That might be when I look at that type of data. It's like, well, maybe it's because you're not paying attention in class, which sometimes happens, but I'm sure it happens no matter what university you're at. That does happen, but those are good things to use. But I mean, the number one thing I do though is even with a big class, I do a lot of group work and I want to bounce around as much as I can and kind of get in and really grasp, do they understand this? And beyond that, are they able to apply this in that scenario? Are they able to create something from that, some type of solution to some specific problem? And then I usually like to have them present the data, present whatever they're doing back to me. So it truly shows to me that they understand whatever the material is, but also how they went from starting with whatever the scenario is A to B to providing some solution to that type of thing. There's a lot of different things, and I'll talk more about this at NSCA. But even if you have a small group, small class, or a very large one, there's ways to get around things when you don't, even if you don't have the best resources to do so. Because if I have a class of over 100 and it only seats 100, there's not much room to move around. So sometimes we'll move out into the hallway. Like you just do what you can.
Got it. Okay, and because you said NSCA, made me wonder, with your department, do you have a path? Is your learning scaffolded in such a way where you're preparing those that are graduating with their bachelor to then go forth and take some type of certification exam, whether it be the CSCS or others? Are you set up in that with that kind of springboard?
So we're talking about that now, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with where the NSCA is going with accreditation. So in 2030, everybody has to be accredited. We're talking about that now, whether or not we are going to invest in that. And I think with ACSM, they also have an accreditation process. So not for personal training, but for like their exercise physiologists, we're definitely going to be pursuing or trying to make sure our students are best set up to where if they want to go pursue these careers, they're able to. I'm interested to see really what happens with the NSCA's accreditation, because if you look at it right now, I think as of today, when I just looked at it, not of today, last week when I looked at this, there's 6 programs that are already accredited, and they're all small private schools.
Yeah, Springfield College, I think, was the first one.
Yeah,
and there aren't too many, right?
It's a great program, but it's not. I didn't see a single state school or something that might be more affordable on there. So I'm interested to see, like, is that just because they're in the process right now, or they're waiting to do it, or what? Because I would love to do that, but I also recognize the issues from a university level where they have to give the program coordinator for that a course release, which is a financial investment from the university beyond just the paying for the program. So you have to justify that based off the number of students that come through that program. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I definitely want to pursue that. I just don't know that every university is going to be set up the same way where that will work.
And certainly, that makes sense. Now, with the student body that you have in your courses, what are the different kind of career paths that that they have had shot toward?
Yeah, I think this is probably the same, probably nationwide in the U.S. 75-ish% of students coming in think they're going to be a physical therapist. That's what they want to do. But of course, the acceptance rates and the number of students that actually go into PT schools is going to be much lower than that. So that's probably the most popular one, but that's not the one that's most common. One I think we see a lot more that's coming up is going to be more on the wellness fitness side. And that's something I think is definitely important, because just in general, we have a large aging population that we need to be able to do that for. But my passion obviously is in strength and conditioning, so that's where that's what I would like to see: strength conditioning, personal training, a lot of that stuff. But we also have students that go into chiropractic, occupational therapy. Some students that will actually come through because most medical schools don't require a specific undergraduate degree. It's just certain prerequisites. So we might have some students that want to be an MD. We've had some students that want to be dentists before. So it's literally all over the place. But the overwhelming majority is people want to be physical therapists. And that's another one that's kind of unfortunate, because we have to be the one. We have advisors that tell students all the time, like, this is probably what you're best suited to do as far as the classes you've taken, your GPA and all that. But students don't always believe them. And I have to talk to a student that has a 2.3 GPA and say, I don't think they're going to get into PT school. And it's one of those that I think represents a problem for some of the other fields, because then they're like, oh, well, then as a backup, I'll go and do this. And I was like, okay, well, that's also very science-based. Like everything in exercise science is science-based. And if they struggle with those classes, it's kind of, I don't like being the one to have to tell them necessarily that this isn't going to work out for you. But that sometimes we do have to do that. But that's another part where, you may not like about your job, but it happens.
Well, you mentioned aging population. I guess this might be my last question here, is that with your samples, your test samples, it's very easy, obviously, to find the 18 to 25-year-old sample base because it's readily available on campus. But what about strength training as it relates to the aging process? I mean, there are some studies out there. Is there anything that you like delving into, or is that a field that you just haven't really dove into? I'm just curious, do you bring in people that are, say, 40, 45 or on up to find out the effects of strength training on an aging population?
So just right up front, like I haven't really looked into it. That's not like I'm mostly looking at the younger population,
Sure.
but I absolutely recognize that that's what we should be looking at. And I think it's probably from a research fundability standpoint, like of getting grant money, that's probably gonna be more available than something like a healthy basketball team, whatever we're looking at. So it's something that I'm sure it is looked at quite a bit. It's just not necessarily what I've done. But that is something that obviously is necessary.
All right, we'll have you back in like 6 months. You can tell me how I've changed your entire career path. That would be awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sure my department would approve or would allow me to go more in that area, because University of North Texas is an R1 institution, so like the highest level of the research activity. So bringing in a big grant about funding something like that it would look very good as far as my resume goes. So maybe I should do that.
Well, very good. Well, I tell you what, we're up against the clock. I appreciate the time you've given me thus far, but I'm looking forward to come July when we're, it's a side note, the NSCA seems to find, for years I've been going to the national conferences. There's a few years I haven't, but we had this running joke that wherever the hottest place on the planet is in the month of July, that is where the NSCA has registered for the conference. So this year, the hottest place on the planet is going to be Vegas in both regards. It's going to be hot information, hot outside. So we'll be hiding in the air condition or by the pool for sure. I look forward to meeting you. If people want to learn more about whether it's the University of North Texas, yourself, where can I send them? Where can I put the notes below the description?
Yeah, so I'm not really all that active on social media. I mean, I can give you I'm on Twitter, but I can give you that. But my email is the best way to reach out to me individually. But I am on LinkedIn and then also ResearchGate. Then give you all those links. But yeah, I'm not super active with social media, so probably not the best way.
All right. Well, I'll put in the LinkedIn and I'll put the website to UNT as well. But Chris, this has been great. I look forward to a few months down the road, shaking your hand in person, listening to everything that you're going to be presenting on. It sounds like it's going to be a very interesting topic. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Chris for coming on and sharing all that he's been doing at the University of North Texas and beyond. If you're interested in learning a little bit more and you want to take a trip or stay home and learn online, either way, you can do it in person or online at this year's NSCA National Conference in Vegas. Just go to nsca.com and register for the conference there. We'll see you next week.